Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. So we've seen what the City of Wichita has done regarding the measurement of citizen opinion. And last week, the Kansas Policy Institute released the results of a survey of Wichita voters concerning Wichita's economy and government. In its news release, KPI concluded that Wichita voters are opposed to business incentives, want to pursue privatization over tax increases, and have concerns about how City Hall has recently spent money. Well, this is a scientific survey of 502 registered Wichita voters, and it was conducted by Survey USA, a company that is widely used across the country. And the full results, crosstabs, questions, and methodology are available either at kansaspolicy.org or also at my site, wichitaliberty.org. Well, here are some of the survey results illustrated in charts that I made. Well, the first question the survey asked was, in the past few years, have Wichita City officials used taxpayer money efficiently or inefficiently? And overall, 58% of the respondents believe city spending was inefficient, compared to 28% believing spending was efficient. And I also created charts for this question showing the results broken down by political party and political ideology. The results are surprisingly consistent. An exception is that political independents more strongly believed that city spending was inefficient. Those identifying as politically liberal were more likely to say that city spending was inefficient too. Well, the second question in the survey was, in general, do you agree or disagree with the idea of local governments using taxpayer money to provide subsidies for certain businesses for economic development? And overall, 59% disagreed with using taxpayer money to provide these subsidies, while 34% agreed. And the results are fairly consistent again across political party and ideology, although Republicans are somewhat more likely to agree with using taxpayer funds for economic development incentives, as also are those who identify as political moderates. And the third question asked, would you personally be willing to pay a higher sales tax in the city of Wichita to fund incentives to businesses expanding in Wichita or moving here from other states? Well, overall, 63% said no and 28% said yes. Democrats were a little more likely to say no to this, while Republicans were more likely to say yes. And that pattern was repeated when broken down by political ideology, with the liberals more likely to answer no and conservatives more likely to answer yes. While asking whether voters would be willing to pay a higher sales tax was repeated for several other areas of government spending. In these questions, again asking if Wichita voters would be willing to pay higher sales tax to provide certain services, a definite pattern appeared. Voters are willing to pay for things that are fundamental in nature and less willing to pay for others. As can be seen in this chart, voters are willing to pay for infrastructure and more willing to pay for maintenance of existing infrastructure than for new infrastructure. And voters are most willing to pay for securing a long-term water source. For business incentives, downtown development, and convention centers, Wichita voters express less willingness to pay higher sales tax to fund these items. For the first three things, the things that most people would agree are fundamental concerns of government, the average was 68% of voters willing to pay a higher sales tax rate. But for the last three, the average was only 30%, which is greater than a 2-to-1 margin. Politically, we call that a landslide. And these results are quite a bit different from the results the City of Wichita produced through its surveys and meetings. Well, KPI asked other questions that we'll explore in future episodes of Wichita Liberty TV. Well, Kansas Policy Institute is planning a series of public forums over the coming months to examine multiple options for long-term water solutions, economic development, and infrastructure. National experts on privatization and other options will be brought in, as well as governmental officials who have successfully used privatization to provide services. And the effectiveness of taxpayer subsidies will also be explored. Local elected officials and other civic leaders will be invited to participate. I'll be attending these events, and I hope you will too. Well, this survey from Kansas Policy Institute and the upcoming events are important, and it is nearly certain that Wichita voters will be asked to approve a sales tax increase. How much of a tax increase, what the funds will be used for, and when the election will be held are not known at this time. But we know that left to its own devices, government wants to grow. The impulse of elected officials and bureaucrats is to grow government. The cronies that feed off of government, they want it to grow too. And institutions such as the Hugo Walls School of Urban and Public Affairs at Wichita State University are committed to growing government, although they won't admit it. They just want better government, they say. But we know that the trade-off when government grows, when more activity is shifted away from voluntary participation in markets towards government, well, we get less freedom, less liberty, less prosperity, and the loss of civil society. Well, thank you for watching this episode of Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks.